closer to me. As if you like me.
Mm-hmm.
So the furnace is off now. So we are under time pressure to finish this podcast before the temperature drops to 10 degrees inside here.
Because it is below zero outside.
It is below zero. And I was going to go for a walk today because I thought, yeah, I'll just bundle up. I'll wear a couple layers. I'll wear hat, gloves.
Right.
And then I checked the weather alert and it said wind chill down to negative 35. Don't go outside.
Yeah. Which is...
And I thought, okay.
Yeah. Could take another day off.
So, yeah, we turned the heat off so you wouldn't hear the heater through this podcast. And now we're under time pressure to get it done. So let's start.
Yeah, let's get it done. Yeah. Here we go. Starting.
So I've had a very... How do I even call this week? I was going to say productive. It's not productive in the sense of the last couple of weeks where I was producing things.
Right.
It's been productive in many other ways, I guess.
Yeah.
So one of the ways is that I always try to have a goal for each gig, as we've talked about before. I have some kind of thing that I'm going to try to bring out onto stage that I might have been working on in practice or that can only be worked on while you're at a gig.
Right.
And so I had 2 gigs this weekend, or this last week. I had one with Pamela and I had one at the church.
Yeah.
And I had different goals for each one, and I'm pleased to say that I fulfilled both of those goals. Now, of course, you have to do things multiple times. You can't just think, oh, I did that one time at one gig and now I'm fine.
Now now you own that skill or something.
No.
Yeah.
But so at Pamela's gig, which was at Roots Music Project, which I'll talk more about, my goal was to be more heads up. Because those songs, I know her songs really well now. I mean, there's a couple of new ones that I love that I have to think about a tiny bit, but really not much. So most of the songs I know really well, and we had a brand new drummer who we'd only rehearsed with once.
Oh, right.
Yeah, Jill, I don't remember her last name right now, but jazz drummer, been in Denver for like 30 or 40 years.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, she was great. And so I needed to be more heads up because she was relying on me for some cues and stuff. So, that's
a great chance
to place to be more heads up.
Practice that skill.
And then at the church gig, my goal was to play a song with a pick, which is funny. I've done very little pick playing for having played as long as I have.
Right.
At this point, I learned one Cure song, "Love Cats," on
right.
pick, like 5 years ago.
Yeah, and the bass player from The Cure is even atypical because he's a very down up bass player. Alternating picking.
Okay.
And a lot of times when you're doing your standard rock eighth note thing, you're doing that all with downstrokes.
Yeah.
For the music nerds out there. So he's kind of even a different pick player than you would compare it to a lot of the more standard punk rock. Kind of, yeah.
Well, as I've been playing with the pick, I've been experimenting with up, down versus down, down, down.
Right.
To see what works better. And I don't know if you heard me practicing, but I was working on a Murder by Death song where the rhythm is kind of dun 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 dun, right? And so some of that is really not doable just down.
Right.
Right. It's too fast.
Yeah.
So I was experimenting with, should I keep my hand moving as if I'm a guitar player, where you kind of you just keep your hand moving and sometimes you touch the strings and sometimes you don't.
Right.
Or should I just only go up and down when I'm actually making an up and down
and
a fast
get that pattern?
pair?
Yeah.
And the way it worked for me, and I don't know how people normally do it, but the way it worked for me was not to keep my hand moving, but instead just think about the rhythm I wanted to play and just go up and down when I needed to make noise.
Right.
Makes sense?
Yeah, it really does. And I think there's a natural accent, because you go like da 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 da, and those are not all the same. There are accents within that, even when you sing it with da da's,
Yeah.
And naturally, when you go up and down with the pick, there's also those accents there.
For sure.
And
but my question was would it be more accurate rhythmically for me to keep my hand moving and do down, even though so my hand's going down,
even
down.
though you're not always hitting.
And then I have an up, down with no sound.
Right.
And then up, down with sound. Or is it better for me to just do down, down, wait, up, down, up, down?
I find with bass, that's what I would gravitate towards doing.
I wonder why it works differently on bass than guitar.
Yeah, I think it's because you're picking mainly one string at a time, and guitar you've got this sort of ellipse of your hand that's
Okay.
kind of going up and down the whole time.
Okay. I see.
And the accuracy of which strings you're actually hitting is actually, at least for me, a lot of times controlled by my left hand, not my right hand. Meaning, I'm not being very specific about which strings I'm hitting with the pick. I'm just muting out anything I don't want to sound. Whereas with the bass, you would get all this
Right.
because they're heavy strings. And
Okay.
yeah, so it is a different. I mean, it's another way that bass and guitar are just really different instruments. I mean, they seem.
They look a lot alike.
Yeah, they look a lot alike. They're tuned the same.
Yeah.
But yeah, they are very, very different instruments. It's just not. They don't get played the same.
So anyway, yay me! I played a song on pick at the church on Sunday morning,
Right.
and that went fine.
Yeah.
It was no big deal. But
And you felt like it just went.
it was fine.
Yeah.
It was no big deal.
That's great.
And that's cool. But, as I'm working on our stage performance book, which I wrote a little bit of today, we've said this before. When you are trying to do something new on stage, you're trying to work on your stagecraft, or you're trying to work on whatever it is you're trying to work on, whether it's musical or stagecraft or vocal, you should really only add one challenge at a time.
Oh, yes.
One at a time. And if getting on stage for the first bunch of times, like getting over the nerves, is the challenge, that's it. Don't also try to play an instrument. Don't also try to do the hardest song you've ever sung.
Yeah.
Don't stack them one at a time. And so I wanted to just like have one kind of low pressure gig where I just played with a pick, and I was like, oh, cool. All right. Well, that one, it's not like done forever. There are other songs that are going to be harder. But, I got the first one out of the way. So,
and that is such the way that is so right. I mean, you should just sort of be working on one thing at a time. When you start adding all these, well, I want to make sure I hit this, and I want to make sure I hit this, and I want to, your attention's divided. I think that's great advice.
You kind of set yourself up for failure across all of them, and you make slower progress.
Right. In a lot of ways, you really do. It sounded like that you did doubly good because of the gig, the church gig didn't necessarily start as seamlessly as you would hope. Not that we need to go into that, but that also adds to, that's my point is that's another reason to keep it simple is because when you actually get to a gig, they don't all set up perfectly. Maybe you wind up rushed. Maybe you wind up a little unsure about your sound, or you don't love what you're hearing on stage or whatever. And that's all the more reason to just keep it to like, I'm not going to try to 10x my performance each time.
Just notch it up. Just notch it up.
Because you're going to be dealing with all these things that you didn't plan on, dealing for. Yeah. Anyway, that's what else has been going on?
Well, after the church gig, I went straight from there, which was Highlands Ranch, South Denver, all the way up to Boulder to Coop Studios.
Oh, that's right.
Just a long day to join you and Brian Stacks at Cody's recording session.
Yeah.
So Coop Studios, incredible place.
Yeah, very, very fancy.
Oh, it's a great studio.
Yeah.
And Cody, both Cody and Brian, complete masters of what they do.
Really, they are.
Oh my gosh. I mean, Brian was playing piano, and I don't think I heard him make a mistake.
No, he did not.
The mistakes were all like the vocalists, because, I mean, vocals, you have to try multiple takes and get the right tone and everything, but Brian was just rock solid.
Yeah, I mean, if anything, there were one or two little things where I was like, oh, he didn't mean to do that, but it's also fine. But I could just tell from having now it's the third take, like, oh, he sort of ghost noted into that a little bit. Whereas he hadn't the other times.
Yeah.
But we're talking about tiny details, and not that it mattered. I would keep any of those things for a take. And he was doing it all with like nothing written down.
I know.
It's just all in his head. And some of those songs are really hard. They're not just like cowboy chord country songs where you're like...
He's the solo accompanist for this stuff.
Which, gosh, and I have commented on that with guitar. When you are the solo accompanist for anything, how hard that is goes way up.
Yeah. I don't think I still have a true measure of how smart Brian is musically.
It's really phenomenal.
The longer I know him, the more I'm just like, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? Like, no notes and no mistakes and a whole day of work in the studio, which is exhausting.
The fatigue starts to set in. I mean, it was him being the entire thing for 6 hours. That's going to get,
Yeah.
I know it always baffles me whether his, I don't know, is modesty or is he legitimately like just some savant who's like, yeah, I don't know, it makes sense to me. I just play piano. I honestly don't know the answer to that question. We've been playing with it for 10 years. I don't know which it is. Because sometimes he'll even be doing all this like jazzy stuff and all these like extended chords. And I'm like, wait, what's that third chord? And he's like, and you're like,
I know he doesn't, he's not super strong on written music theory. So like, it's
and I think some of it is he doesn't need to be.
Right.
It's just like, well, it's the chord you hit third. I mean, I don't know what to tell you. You know, like
it's these notes.
Yeah,
you tell me what it is.
I think how much of it's how much of it he's just doing by ear versus how much he memorizes. I still don't know. He is so incredibly modest and nice. There is no way to unpack that. But I thought we got a phenomenal amount of music done.
Yeah. So you were producing and you had great advice for Cody. By the way, I want to say I was blown away by Cody too. We just raved about Brian, but Cody's voice is so good for this music we recorded. So it was more of the Christmas and classical stuff.
Right.
The Broadway stuff.
Yeah.
And he's so good at it.
He's so good.
Oh my
and I was telling him
gosh.
his control of his vibrato is just stunning, which, you know, a vibrato is the thing in people's voices that I traditionally hate.
Yeah.
But somebody who has that level of control over it, and it does that beautiful thing where it starts slow and wider and then it like tightens up and gets a little faster. It's just unbelievably gorgeous. And he kept it together for a very long session where obviously he's the main voice. I mean, there were a couple duets, but
yeah. So Amanda Hawkins came in for Uncomfortable. She was amazing.
Yeah, Amanda was great.
I sang the prayer and the little ending of Hallelujah with him.
Right.
And I was humbled by the prayer, I will have to say. I mean, Cody was encouraging me to go more in that classical direction, not to be super classical, because it is at least the first verse that Celine Dion sings it's more pop than classical. But, you know, I kind of did a fake, like making fun of classical thing.
Yeah.
And he was like, actually, I wouldn't mind if you did more of that. And so I tried to add more of it. And I felt like, well, I just don't sing that way very much. And so my tonal balance, even though I tried to keep lots of brights on top of those darks, because, you know, when you go, you get a lot of dark sound. You got a lot of big sound waves and a lot of space. I was trying to keep the brights through the face on top of that. So you also, it's not just, it sounded woofy to me. It didn't sound great. So we'll see how you mix it and if I need to re-record. I don't know.
I mean, I thought you sounded great. I thought, you know, I mean, it was one thing I said to you. So it was interesting doing that type of, I mean, most producing I do, not all, but most of it I'm also engineering. So it's a little bit different. And this was a session at Coop with a wonderful engineer named Chris, whose last name I need to look up, who I thought was phenomenal. And we just dropped right into a workflow and it was great. Didn't even discuss how to... but I was doing a lot more of the old school version of producing where I'm not really worried about the technical issues. And with Brian and Cody on the case, I wasn't all that worried about a lot of musical issues. Like I did not really need to keep track of, I didn't need to be looking at charts so people were doing the right chords and were doing the right whatever. That part was handled. It was much more the old school production of just being like, you know, let me mark all the places we might want to go back and look at when we get done with this take. And also a lot of it is just being a cheerleader.
Yeah.
You know, because people do perform better when they're more confident. And, and you're never like making stuff up. but some of it is just like pointing out the things they're doing really good and just saying, no, listen to this, like, listen how good you sound here. And it just like, it helps. And it's that kind of thing. And you make the same jokes you've been making in the studio for 30 years.
And everybody laughs.
And everybody laughs, and it keeps the mood light. And that's sort of, it's not normally my job to produce as that type of producer.
I would give you more credit than that. And here's why. For the Lost Blessing song.
Oh, yeah, right.
So Cody did it spectacularly the first time and the second time. And then I think you maybe asked him to bring some more emotion to it or add some juice to it or something. And he did. And then we got a great take, and it was very expressive. People were crying. So
it was
he had,
literally...
Yeah, he had some of his Patreon's members in the studio with him, and there was sniffling and people dabbing at their eyes after that was done. And then you were like, okay, we got it. It's in the can. But just to see, why don't you go overboard on the emotion? Like, just go wild.
Right.
Just go way too far with the emotion.
Right.
That one gave the whole room chills. People were crying.
It got me too.
Oh my God.
I was getting a little, yeah.
It was so good.
And that's some of what that kind of producing is being.
Right.
Is being like, hey, I promise you we have it.
Yeah.
So now
it frees the singer.
You now have freedom to just go. Who cares if the next one's good? Like, go, just make it as emotional as possible. And if it goes off the rails, who cares? I promise you we have.
Right.
What we need.
Right.
And that sometimes is, well, and on the Lost Prayers Blessing too, that was another one where I guess it is a little more technical. I could hear him hurrying. He was getting a little worried about, like we said, we did just 3 takes, which is pretty amazing. But that first take, he was a little worried about it being boring.
Right.
And it is one of those songs where the melody's kind of chanty and it goes over and over again. And that actually, to the listener, is what's so affecting about it, is you're just getting served this thing. But Cody, as the performer, was feeling rushed and feeling like, I feel like I'm being boring. I kind of want to get through this. So as a result, his pacing of it was just a little fast. And that's where I popped in and said, hey, I feel like you feel like you're being boring. And I promise you, you're not. Slow down.
Yeah.
There was a little bit of hurry. I mean, you might not even be able to say that it was like a beat per minute difference. It maybe wasn't even measurable in that sense.
Probably just on the front of the beat.
It was just being on the front of the beat, but he was feeling a little rushed, and so he was hurrying the song along.
Yeah.
And for that song, it was like, no, slow it down. And then that next take was the one where everybody started crying, and it was because he just slowed it down. Yeah. Just a little tiny bit.
I can't wait to hear what these sound like. It was so good.
Yeah. And the guys at the studio were amazing. And it was just a great experience. It was fun working on that.
So I want to go back to something I mentioned at the very beginning. I said I had to get with Pamela. And I mentioned that we did it at Roots Music Project in Boulder, which I said I would come back and talk about. So I want to talk about that now. So Roots Music Project is a nonprofit organization and venue like the Muse is.
Right.
And they're about a year old and maybe a little longer, but Rick Gabler is one of the guys who started it.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, that's it.
So Rick, how did we get connected? I think we got connected when we ran into each other at Doghouse Music when we used to rent space there.
Oh, okay.
And I think he knew who I was for some reason, or we hit it off, or I don't know what. But he invited me to start a band, and he brought in a drummer who had auditioned for Frank Zappa. I mean,
oh, wow.
This guy was real deal. The drummer was great. And Rick Gabler, and we brought in Brian Stax. And I was singing.
I now remember, I remember this.
I don't remember who was on bass.
Yeah.
I don't know if we had a bassist, but that project just never really got off the ground. It was just a brand new thing, but it was great to run into Rick Gabler again. He wants us to play there. He was asking about the Petty Nicks experience, and I was like, I think we're actually too big for this place.
I mean, we might be.
Yeah. But it's a perfect place for Performance High. It's
like well, then there you go. Yeah. That would be amazing. I mean, I haven't seen the room. I've just
It's great. It's a warehouse space that they've done up.
Right.
They've made it really homey. It's got a spacious stage and lots of hanging lights.
Great!
Top. Lots of decorations.
Okay.
Photos. It's really cool. It's got a great vibe and a huge green room, which is also a second rehearsal space.
Oh.
Huge for a green room, and it's a big rehearsal space too.
Yeah, that's
Yeah. So shout out to Roots Music Project. I wish them all the success, and we'll probably have a showcase there at some point.
That sounds
Yeah.
That sounds great. We're so lucky that so many people are keeping things moving and working,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
really.
So
Well, yeah.
I have so much to talk about. I'm just going to keep talking.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks for trying to lead us.
Yeah.
I'm the one who has like, all these notes. So I think I mentioned last podcast that I've been on a tear.
Uh-huh.
I've been working like crazy since I got home from vacation in Florida, starting the very next day, which was New Year's Eve. I think I worked 12 hours that day, and I
Yeah.
got up at like 6 o'clock in the morning on New Year's Day, and I worked another 12 hours. I mean, so I've been on a tear that has felt manic. And it at a certain point, it started feeling like it was spinning out of control. Like I was conscious that I was kind of being a lunatic. I'm like texting people at 6 o'clock in the morning. I'm like, just the way my brain was like, it was like going
Right.
and I just felt it happening. I was like, I can't sleep very well. I don't want to eat very much. And I figured out how to think of it, which I mean, what I think is literally happening physically, which will be helpful the next time it happens, which is, so we have two nervous systems. We have the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. So we have the nervous system that engages, it prepares the body for fight or flight. So it's very much about like fast thinking and fast heart rate and shunting blood away from the digestive system and away from the reproductive system.
Right.
It's about adrenaline. It's about being ready to go, to act, to run.
Right.
Right. And so that's the nervous system that was dominant for me during that whole period. And then the parasympathetic nervous system is the rest and digest nervous system. So it is more active when you are resting, when you're digesting, when you're calm. So you have a lower heart rate, you have less adrenaline, you have more digestive function, you're less prepared to get up and sprint. Right.
And that's
Slower,
its function.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I've had this before in my life where I feel like I get stuck in this accelerating manic phase. And previously, the only way I've gotten off of it is to run it to burnout. Like I run it until it crashes.
Right, which is not maybe the best.
Yeah. But there's a high to it.
Yeah.
It's kind of fun.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, look at all this stuff I'm getting done. And like, I can just move from one thing to the next and the next and the next. And I don't ever get tired. And oh my gosh. And I wake up, I only need 5 hours of sleep. But it's not a great thing to have to run yourself to burnout periodically. So I was able to have a slow landing on this one. I don't know how I managed to do it. I think I just was watching myself being like, this is not healthy. But now I have fully crashed in a good way. So Friday, I took 2 naps. Saturday, I took 2 naps. Today, I took 1 nap.
Right.
And I have been eating. Like, I think it was Friday or Saturday. I ate like every hour or two.
Yeah.
I would finish lunch and then I would go back for another protein bar or something.
For more food. Yeah. Well, I think you do that when you are getting a bunch of stuff done. You're not really eating enough to, eating as much as you should be.
Yeah.
Which, of course, if you're sort of in that more amplified, like, hurry up and get stuff done thing, you just don't feel hungry at the time.
Yeah.
It'd
exactly.
probably be hard to force yourself to. That's such an interesting line of thought.
Yeah. And the way that I figured it out is I went back and as part of my weekly learning that I'm trying to do starting this year, it's like I want to like just spend 1 hour a week just learning, like reading books or watching conference videos or whatever. I went back and watched opera coach Mark Baxter's presentation for the IFTOM conference last year. And he talked about the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous systems. And the reason he talked about them was because most students come into their lessons in more of a fight or flight mode.
Oh, yes, of course.
Because voice lessons are scary and because the world requires us to be productive and move fast.
Right.
So people come in at a kind of this elevated, activated, sometimes fearful, nervous state.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, before you can try to work on the voice or the person or their delivery of a song or anything, you have to get them into a parasympathetic nervous system state. You need to get them to calm down and feel safe.
Yeah.
Because that's how you change the subconscious. That's how you work with the voice and the body. That's how people are open to suggestion.
Right. And that's when yeah, exactly. I'm sure
Right.
that's when you're doing that deep learning and that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So just watching that video reminded me of the existence of these two nervous systems. And then it just clicks for me. Like, I feel like I get stuck in the sympathetic nervous system on occasion. It hasn't happened in many years at this point.
Right.
Because I burned out so many times that I stopped doing it.
Yeah, and that doesn't mean you don't get things done or that you don't get amped up for things like shows and all those things.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, the getting stuck in it maybe feels like something different is what I think
Yeah.
you're saying.
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't know. Just with that different perspective, maybe it'll help me modulate it a bit more in the future somehow.
I do that. I mean, that's one of the things we were talking about, joking around with producing, and you're saying the same jokes, and I wouldn't have thought about it that way, but very often that's what I'm trying to do too.
Oh, yeah.
Is people are amped up and nervous and like, okay, we got to do another song. And I'm sometimes, when I see it, I'm getting in the way of that.
Right.
You're sort of rodeo clowning it a little bit.
You're like, hey, let's have a drink. Let's have a conversation. Let's
Yeah,
sit
yeah,
back and
let-
talk about our day.
Let me make a dumb joke that I know you've heard me make 20 times before. You know, like, and, you know, I was telling you in the car, that's one of the things I learned early on from John Kurzweig, who I learned so many things from. Phenomenal producer, and even being in high school and being around him, and he would joke around a bunch, and then every once in a while he'd be joking around a bunch, and then he'd like look at me like, see what I'm doing? Like, it's getting people like almost thinking about something else, you know, and like,
Yeah.
there's times you even like chit chat more than you should, and you know you're slightly annoying people by chit chatting a little too much, but that's better for them to be thinking about than thinking about how nervous they are to.
Right.
You know, there's all those little things you do to just, and that is so interesting you brought that up, because that's one of the things you're watching out for, you're managing when you're managing a recording session, is exactly that. Keeping people in those different spots.
Yep.
Well, gosh, so you've got stuff. Do we have anything else? Do we want to try to unice the house?
Yeah, let's turn the heater back on.
Okay.
Which means we need to end this podcast. So, yeah.
It's not really that cold in here, but we are all doubled up.
Yeah, I mean, I'm wearing like warm sweatpants, but also underneath the sweatpants, I'm wearing my warmest workout tights,
Yeah.
and my feet are cold.
It's not bad, and it's an oddly fun change of pace. I mean, you know, you wouldn't want it to be this way forever, but like for a weekend, just
Well, I feel grateful.
snuggle in and.
I feel grateful we are housed.
Well, we are very lucky to be housed. We are very lucky to be housed in a place that is easy to make pretty comfortable. Mm-hmm. And, you know, if anything, we're just not running the heater full out because the energy company said, hey, things are going to be straining. So if you can, and we luckily kind of can, and we can tuck in at bed. And
I have an electric blanket.
Yeah.
I took a nap under the electric blanket yesterday.
And I'm a middle-aged man, so I get hot very easily. So I'm doing great.
So
I don't know what it is.
your room is the one that doesn't have two outside walls.
That is true. But I do find myself not having a problem with the temperature. Anyway, we are going to turn the furnace back on. And once again, thanks for watching. We are sponsored, as always, by Performance High.
Voice and Music Studio.
And no one else. So
you're not making the money rolling this week, are you?
No, it's an off week. You know, it's slow.
Yeah, early January.
After the holidays, yeah.
Exactly. All right. Well, see you next week.
Thanks.